children with certain forms of epilepsy that are potentially fatal and extremely damaging. I never dreamed before then that our breakthrough in the south of the U.S. would involve supplying marijuana to children, but that's how it happened. Now, of course, today we have legalization in 8 states. The progression to get there demonstrates a number of interesting and possibly unique aspects to how things happen in the United States. One, it demonstrates the limits of federal power versus states. We have a system in which federal law is supreme on this issue. No state law can prevent federal agents from arresting, prosecuting a provider of marijuana or a simple possessor for that matter. However, our Constitution says that, at least in most cases, the federal government cannot commandeer the states, and they can't force the states themselves to criminalize a drug transaction. But most of the law enforcement in the U.S. is state or local, and so there's no effective even way of having a pretense of enforcing cannabis prohibition without the states actively participating in it. And this is why it's worked, because there are people who are willing to commit civil disobedience, in this case of a financially based, often commercial kind, with a fair amount of political support for what they were doing, and then laws protecting them from the state authorities. That said, the federal government could have done a great deal more to prosecute and attack the supply side of medical marijuana or of legal marijuana. And even at the times when it felt the worst, the number of prosecutions were really pretty few, tiny compared to what they could have been. And that's been the case under several administrations now, both Democratic and Republican. Now, moving forward, we found disagreements within civil society, including our own movement. There are disagreements on how to structure legalization, disagreements over what type of laws to try to pass. Do we try to pass the big thing that has everything, or do we accept compromises in order to get what we can? And then what kind of compromises do we accept? For example, in Washington State, I-502, Washington and Colorado were on the ballot. And most of us felt it was extremely important that they both pass. Now, Washington had some controversial aspects. There was a driving under the influence provision, which is based on a specific blood concentration threshold, which was criticized as not being scientific. Criticism was valid, but it was a political decision. The organizers believed, rightly or wrongly, that to get it passed, they needed to exactly mirror the structure of the state's alcohol driving under the influence law. Also, what contributed to opposition within our movement was it did not have a home cultivation provision. For me, my view was, well, of course, we want there to be personal cultivation allowed, but we want to pass legalization most of all. Some advocates went so far as to argue that it's not legalization if it doesn't have home growing, even if it allows people to legally sell, distribute, possess, and consume marijuana, which I thought was a nonsense argument, despite my sympathy for home growing. And the likely impact of the driving under the influence law was also greatly exaggerated by opponents. The initiative did well. 2 years before, though, in California, we saw on Prop 19 a good deal of opposition from within the cannabis community itself. Um, California built up this a very substantial and very open medical system, and legalization means change. It threatens some people's livelihoods. It threatens to change a type of community that they feel part of, and that has its good aspects. The fear of what a commercialization, large-scale commercialization of marijuana would do. And Prop 19 failed. It's borderline whether it could have passed had there not been the internal opposition in the movement. Now we have passed we passed the initiative in California now, and there was a lot of debate, disagreement over just how to write that. Fortunately, people did come together. Now, moving forward, there's great uncertainty what's going to happen under the Trump administration with Attorney General Sessions. The medical system probably is safe. The regulated system, we don't know. If they decide to send threatening letters to cannabis businesses or their vendors, they can probably shut down a lot. And the statements have really been ambiguous. The most likely prediction I've heard, or I think is most likely, is that there'll be a somewhat meaner version of what we have now. But as I said, I'm hopeful we still have the long-term advantage. We've seen mainstream organizations support these. State regional conferences of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, for example, NAACP, supported several, if not all, of the legalization initiatives. We see groups on our own sign on statements on international drug policy, which include aspects that relate to legalization, even if they don't always call directly for it. So we've come a long way. It's a completely different world than when I first started doing this, and but we're going to have an interesting few years ahead.